Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katiuska Loaiza Espinosa, and I'm the new Director of Multicultural Affairs and Residential Education here at Cazenovia College. And thank you so much for joining us in our post-election dialogues. Today, Wednesday, we do have Maureen Zupan from Cazenovia Call to Action as our guest speaker. And we hope to address some of the same questions we had with Anti-Racism Coalition at Cazenovia with Dara and Philip. So for today, we do have Maureen, and I will ask Maureen to hopefully introduce herself and Cazenovia Call to Action for y'all. I'll learn a little bit more. Today is my first time meeting Maureen and also learning about Cazenovia Call to Action. Maureen, please go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and about Cazenovia Call to Action.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Like she said, I'm Maureen Zupan. I live here in Cazenovia, but I was born and raised in the Bronx. So all you Brooklynites can do your down finger here. I come from a family, and I think this is important to some of the things we're going to be discussing. I come from a family of New York City cops. My grandfather, my father, my uncle were all New York City cops. My brother is a retired New York City fireman. I had never left the New York City area before I went to college. And I went to college here in upstate New York in Geneva, which is about an hour and a half west of here at Hobart William Smith Colleges. And I met somebody from Cazenovia, married him, and have been here since the early 1970s. I still am very involved in my college, by the way. I've been on their board of trustees since the mid-1990s and served for a few years as their chair. I'm proud to have been the only female chair so far in a school that has a 200-year history. So I was glad to break that barrier. 4 years ago, when we had the election that resulted in Donald Trump being elected, until then, I had never been involved in politics in any way. And soon after the election, I got a call from a friend who said, let's meet. And we met actually at Common Grounds in the diner there, in Dave's Diner. And he said to me that he was very anxious about what might happen in this country over the following 4 years. And he wanted to know if there was anything we could do about it. So we did some thinking and talking and brought 3 or 4 other people into our conversations a week later. And a couple of weeks after that, we gathered 35 people up at the Hampton Inn in Cazenovia to talk about what we might like to do. And we didn't have political experience. I didn't, they didn't, and we really didn't know what we wanted to do, how to do it, but we knew we wanted to do something. And as I was going through the internet looking for ideas, up popped something called the Indivisible Guidebook. A group of, I think it was 5 legislative congressional staffers had gotten together. They were former staffers in Congress and had gotten together to devise a handbook that people could use, activists could use to make connections with congressional reps. Their theory is that it's very hard to change things at the national level. We couldn't knock on the president's door and get a meeting with him to discuss anything. But we could knock on our local congressional representative's door and get a meeting with him or her. So their handbook was all about how to do that, how to make those connections, how to organize, how to present yourself. That organization, Indivisible, that started with these 5 congressional reps, is now a national organization that is frequently called upon to talk on shows like Rachel Maddow. She's a big fan of the Indivisible organization, and they're a strong force of activism all across the United States. So this group, when we got together, we had the handbook. It was like, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to work to influence our local congressional rep. And we started advertising that we wanted to get more people involved in doing this. So as I said, the first meeting, we had 35 people. The next meeting, we had 150. And the meeting after that, we had 250 people. We now have 550 people in our database. They, a chunk of them participate, probably about 70 or so participate monthly in meetings that we have to talk about strategy and issues. And there, about 200 of them read our weekly newsletter. And if anybody wants to participate in any of those or get on our distribution list, I'd be happy to, reach out through your contacts there, and I'd be happy to get you on our list. So we, early on, were talking about issues, things that were important to us, the environment, immigration, women's rights, and we had groups that were formed around that. But about a year into this, when the congressional campaign started going for 2018, so this was in 2017, we realized that we needed to go back to basics and figure out how to influence the congressional elections. So to give perspectives for those of you not from this area, in 2016, a woman named Claudia Tenney was elected congressional rep. This is in a three-way race. She was elected the congressional representative. She's a Republican. She's very, very conservative. And she likes to say that she was Trump before Trump. So we actively started working against her, didn't even know who would be the Democratic candidate at that point. And when the Democratic candidate was determined, his name is Anthony Brindisi. We worked very hard with all kinds of tactics to get him elected. And this is a very, very heavily Republican conservative district. Republicans outnumber Democrats, I think it's by 30,000 in this district. And by the way, the district runs from Utica in the east to Oswego in the northwest, all the way down to Binghamton. So it's a very big geographical district. And so Anthony Brindisi was the person who was running. He was a former New York State assemblyman. And we rallied behind him using the Indivisible guidebook. And in this highly Republican district, when she was running for re-election and Anthony was running against her in 2018, he defeated her. And it was by a small number of votes. I think it was 4,000 votes but it was in a region, in a district that was highly Republican. So Anthony has been our representative since 2018, and 2020, he was up for re-election. We worked very hard in 2020 to get him reelected, because in Congress, that second election, when you're first trying to get reelected, is probably harder than the first time around, because you now have a record that lots of people can throw darts at and or not. So there's a record there that you have to defend. So the election, as you know, was November 3rd. This is the first year that early voting and absentee ballots were heavily used. In the past, and this isn't just true here, it's true all over the country, they weren't used that much. Here and the rest of the country, for this election, they were heavily used. And on election day, so that would have included people who came and voted early, and people, it was all in-person voting. They voted early or they voted on election day. When the dust settled on election day, Claudia Tenney was ahead by 27 or 28,000 votes. So then in New York State, they don't start counting the absentee ballots and the military ballots and the provisional ballots for a week. So we thought we had a lot of good votes in that group, but we didn't know. So in the days since the ballots have started to be counted, and they haven't all been counted, that gap went from 28,000 to, I heard it on TV tonight, it's 2,200. So it's way, way down. And there are about 9,000 ballots still to be counted. Anthony has been receiving 70% of the votes, of these absentee votes, which is about what he needs to do to overtake her. If he continues to get 70%, he will win, but by very, very little. So we're on pins and needles trying to make this happen. So Kaz's call to action was heavily involved in these elections, but we also, I'm proud to say, have kind of been the birthing place of some other organizations in town where people followed their passions. So, for example, there's a group called the United Climate Action Network, and they sponsor a lot of events through the year. And Cazenovia College is involved with them, I know, pretty tightly. So there's that group. There's Cazenovia Welcomes Immigrants. And right close to Cazenovia College, there are immigrant families that this group has sponsored to bring to Cazenovia. There is the group that Dara Harper talked about last night, which is Arc Cazenovia, which has to do with racial justice. So they're part of Kaz Call to Action, the individuals, but out of realizing that you can make a difference if you work at it, these individuals started these organizations. So where we're at right now, we're anxiously awaiting the result of this vote. I hope Claudia Tenney doesn't win. So the same woman was running again. I left that out. She also, by the way, in the last election, after the shootings in Florida at the high school, talked about how isn't it interesting that most mass murderers end up being Democrats, which is like, okay. The Brindisi campaign got a lot of donations from all over the country after she did that. So we're anxious to get Anthony back in there and reelected. Excuse me. I do want to do a couple of sentences on citizen activist and advocacy. I, like I said, was never involved with politics up till, and through many election cycles, never involved up till the point when I felt very offended by some of the things that Donald Trump was saying. And that's when I got heavily involved. I have inspiration from some people that I consider heroes in my life and that I've had the privilege to meet. One is Bishop Michael Curry, who is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. He's the first African-American to be in that job. And if you follow royal weddings, he made a name for himself when he did the sermon for the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan, whatever her name is, and did a pretty interesting sermon that got a lot of play all over the world. And he said, I actually heard him yesterday, I participated in a session with him yesterday, and he said, do not submit to the world as it is. That's like one of his mottos. He also said, and I think this is important going forward, that yes, we're a very divided country, but what we have to do to bridge that divide is to be developing relationships with each other. Much as I may not like things that some people that worship Trump say, I need to find a way to sit down and talk with them so we both understand each other, why people feel a certain way, why I feel a certain way. The other person that I was thrilled to be able to spend an evening with is the late Congressman John Lewis, who died within the last year, former congressman of in the Atlanta area. And he also was the last surviving person who spoke at Martin Luther King's March on Washington. He had been the youngest one. He had gotten beaten up and thrown in jail after the march on Selma. But he was the last one surviving who spoke on the platform with Martin Luther King. And he said, this is a quote that I love, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. So I don't presume that I can redeem the soul of America, but I feel like by getting involved with things I feel passionate about, I can and have had an influence. And I'm glad and appreciative of all the people that have come along with me in that journey.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction and for letting us know and educating us on Cazenovia call to action and a little bit about behind the scenes of voting and absentee votes. Truly appreciate that because I think this year it's most important that we're learning that every vote does count. If you're eligible to vote, I hope people voted. So I appreciate you letting us know that. For the viewers, the reason why I'm looking down is because the iPad is down here so I can talk to Maureen. So I apologize for not keeping my eyesight up there. But with you letting us know that really a lot of people from Cazenovia came together in 2017, I believe you said 2018, because of the current president and administration and what was happening at the time. Could you maybe tell our viewers a little bit of what was it that impacted you to want to put action behind that? Was there something that was said? Was there something particular in the news that made you have that passion that, or was it just overall what was happening during that time?
Well, things for me, and this was before we started Cast Call to Action, during the election cycle leading up to his election, there were things that he said about people that just made me craze. When he made fun of the reporter who had significant physical disabilities, when he talked about women on that bus with Billy, whatever his name is, in such a disparaging way. There was one thing after another when he would criticize reporters that were asking him questions and saying they were fake news, and it just offended me, frankly. So, and I'll admit, it wasn't even at that point his what he wanted to accomplish in the United States that offended me. It was how he treated people. I just didn't think, like, is this the best we can do as a representative of the United States? Somebody who is so offensive. When he became president, things started happening pretty quickly that I was offended with on the actions he was taking. For example, that was when he did the Muslim ban. Among other things, he started going fast and furious and on all kinds of issues that I was offended with. And that has only you can look at nearly any issue, like issues that we're that are important to us, like the environment. He had done for water, for air, for the natural resources we have in the United States. He's dismantling all this as fast as he can, and so those are the kinds of things that offended me, and I think brought a lot of us together. So yeah, it was a lot of things.
And from, thank you for mentioning this. And from the past 4 years, and hopefully with all the recounts and all the information we're getting from social media, from news, that we do have a president-elect Joe Biden. And hopefully we will have that understanding with the votes that come in with our electoral college in December, and then in January 20th, when we have the official date of who is our president. What are you looking forward for the next 4 years for President-elect Biden's administration to focus on? What are some topics that you hope are dear to you that they focus on?
First and foremost, getting a handle on this virus. I'm just astounded that President Trump has just backed away from doing anything about the virus. He doesn't go to the meetings about it. I was an executive in an insurance company, and then I had my own business. I know what it means to be a leader of hundreds of people. And he's supposed to be a leader of millions of people. There are things you have to do to have people want to work with you, and he doesn't know how to do those things. So we need somebody that will take this virus seriously. I know it doesn't affect everybody in bad ways, but it affects too many people in bad ways. And to me, this is part of, am I just going to think about myself as an individual and say, well, nobody can tell me to wear a mask or to stay home or whatever? Or are we going to be the kind of country that will look for the greater good, not just our own good, that can find the balance between a greater good and our own good? And that's when I have heard President-elect Biden's press conferences. It's a world of difference. He treats people with respect. He's not yelling at them. He's not disparaging them. He's answering their questions. And it was incredible after 4 years of forgetting that that's the way it should be, to have it be that way again. So I'm hoping that they get the virus under control, that they start undoing some of the damages that have been done, like to environmental regulations. You know, he's trying to sell off the Arctic oil fields to allow drilling up in the Arctic. It's crazy. First of all, we don't need it, and you know, I don't. So we need to reverse some of the damage that he's been doing to the environment, to the economy. I've long believed that the way he comes up with the things he's going to do is by looking at what Barack Obama did and just doing the opposite. That there's something there that he resents. So I'm hoping we can somehow overcome this divisiveness. I think it's going to be a long time before we trust each other again from the different sides of the political spectrum. And I think that's a very sad outcome of these past 4 years.
Thank you. Today, I was able to see President-elect Joe Biden have some sort of a news conference, and it was virtual. And in the virtual conference, he had individuals who work in the healthcare, teachers, and talking about how our frontline workers are really struggling and how our students and patients are struggling. So I appreciate you bringing up COVID, because unfortunately, for some, COVID is a political issue now.
Right.
Whether,
I don't understand.
Who do you support if you're wearing a mask or you don't wear a mask? Instead of thinking we're all going through it, we're all at risk, some populations more than others, yes. But it was uplifting to see President-elect Biden have that conversation with the people that know about the virus more, who are dealing with it, even though he currently is not our president, taking those steps 2-3 months ahead of the day he is to be official. So it was uplifting. It brought hope to myself, I will admit.
There was another part of that. I only saw a small part of it, but there was a nurse, I think it was a nurse talking, and she started to weep a little bit about all the people that were dying. And he started to cry too. I mean, that's a normal human reaction of empathy. And I think that's been sorely missing for 4 years. And that made me feel positive. It's kind of weird, I guess, seeing somebody suffering so much emotionally and feel positive about the country because of that. But I think we need to get back to respecting each other, hearing what each other is saying, trying to understand it, disagreeing maybe on policy, but we don't need to disagree on who we are as people.
Yes, and just because we are talking about COVID, I do want to ask a little bit about what your possible advice is for our viewers who could potentially be students from Cazenovia College, or faculty or staff, or even our Cazenovia residents here. And, or of course, because YouTube is global, live streaming, anyone could be watching. Do you have any words of advice for how to maintain social distance and importance of COVID?
You know, one of the things I told one of your professors, who's a friend of mine, that I could tell who the Cazenovia College students were since the time they came back on campus to Cazenovia, because no matter where they were wearing masks. You know,
Yeah.
even if they weren't on campus and they were walking down Albany Street, they were wearing masks. Where most people weren't doing that. They, you know, if they went into a store, they put a mask on. But the Cazenovia College students were wearing masks all the time, and I really appreciated that as a Cazenovia resident. I don't even know how to explain why I appreciated that, but I thought that was wonderful. So we have to wear masks. You know, the science says that it helps both the person wearing it and the people that you might get close to. And if there's only one person that it helps, I'd like to think that putting a mask on, which is not terrible, is a good thing to do for our fellow citizens. So definitely that. I love around here that people seem to be very observant of the 6 foot distancing. I was in Syracuse today, and people are doing the same thing. Like, it used to be like if you were trying to go into a store, the door, and you know, you're all trying to get in and bumping into each other or whatever. Now you see people stepping aside and allowing somebody to go in and staying away until they're in, or if somebody's inside, they step aside and wait till the person's in. It clearly is that people around here seem to appreciate the 6 foot distancing. And the other thing is to wash hands. I don't do that as much as I should, but I keep the antibacterial spray around to spray onto my hands occasionally. And I don't consider it a burden. I feel like I'm respecting my fellow citizens in doing those. It can't hurt. It can't possibly hurt. Doing any of those things are not going to hurt the people doing it, and it's not going to hurt the people they come in contact with. So I don't understand why anybody wouldn't do all of those things.
Well, thank you so much for letting us know you appreciate our students wearing the mask. So thank you for that shout out. I do want to switch a little bit gears because you did mention something about learning strategies on how to have dialogues with the opposing individuals with opposing views. So I'd like to go back to that, if that's okay, and ask if you could give myself or our viewers some of those tips and strategies you talked about or you learned from the organization Indivisible, I believe you said. Because I think the point of our dialogues today about post-election is that we know everybody did not vote for the same person, right? It's important to know we have freedom of speech and to be able to talk about who we like and who we dislike in a respectful manner. But that's the point, right? The respectful part. Some individuals, unfortunately, can't do that or are able to. And it's really about learning some skills to do that. And so could you maybe talk a little bit about that part?
To do it, I have to admit that I'm sometimes not good at doing it. It's easy for me to get angry about some things that I think people are saying and doing that I resent. So first is admitting, I think, understanding who you are as a person and what gets you going. And then, as hard as it is to try to listen to people, I also have something that I learned many, many years ago in a management class that I still teach people, that sometimes it's very hard to get your point across, especially if you're angry and upset. So there's a sentence that I learned. And actually, the people that wrote the book about this sentence and started teaching about it many years ago had a business here in Cazenovia where people would come in to learn this strategy. So this is when you're upset about something and you're trying to get the point across. The last thing that you want to do is say, you are a dirty dog, you are so stupid, you are this, you are that. because it's very easy for the person listening to that to deny it. That's not me. I didn't do that, whatever. So here's the sentence. It has three parts to it. The first part, you start with when you, and you give a specific action after that. So for example, when you spoke about my mother in a terrible way, whatever it is that got you going. The second part of it is I felt. So you're not saying you're a dirty dog and you're not acting right or whatever. You're saying how you feel, because nobody can deny that you feel that way. If I accuse you of being a sarcastic person, you can deny that. So it has to be an I feeling. Here's how I feel. And then the third part of it is when. You say, I'm sorry, the third part of it is because, and you explain why you feel that way. So it's when you talk badly about my mother, I felt very sad because she was very important to me. Nobody can deny any of those pieces because they're what you are and how you feel. When you're confronting somebody who's angry and you're getting into an angry conversation, the other piece of this is when you have your sentence, you say it over and over again until you know that they heard you. Because when you're in an angry conversation with somebody, you're not listening to each other. So the point is to have a sentence. When you know you have something difficult to say to somebody, write your sentence out ahead of time, analyze the parts of it, and then go prepared to very nicely say the sentence many times. So when you say your sentence and they say, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, you say, I hear you, but when you blah, blah, I feel blah, blah, because. And you keep saying that until they hear you. So I get angry. I do get angry. And, you have to bring me down sometimes. And the people I work with are good at making sure I don't go over the ledge too much. So I don't know that I'm really good at it, but I try.
No, I do appreciate those 3 tips: when, I feel, because. And I think you're right. For some, it's about validating, and it's so hard to validate something that you might not experience or know you impacted someone that way, but just listening, right? Listening intensively and to really be there for that person. I think, and I feel as well, that it's okay to be frustrated because there's so many things in the world that are so hurtful, right? We have individuals that are being murdered and killed because of their skin color. I tear up, and I can't even imagine that psychological trauma of knowing that every day. For me, for our Latinx community, there are people being deported and caged
right
every day.
Right.
And I feel like I'm not doing enough to help. And I know that our LGBTQIA community struggles every day as well, either being accepted at home or not, right? There's so many marginalized communities struggling, and it's hard to not feel frustrated when someone doesn't agree with your hurt or agree with your opinion of your own experience. So I appreciate those 3 advice tips of when, I feel, because, and just saying that. And hopefully the frustration does calm down a little bit so you can have that conversation with someone else.
Because you're not accusing them of anything.
Right.
You're telling how you feel. And so if they have any empathy, they'll react to that. And again, the key is to say it over and over again, saying, I hear what you're saying, but when you blah, blah, I feel blah, blah, because. And eventually they'll hear you. And somebody said to me, I asked this question in the class when I learned this a few decades ago. Well, what happens if the person you're in this thing with also went to this class and they recognize what you're doing? And what they told me was they'll be even more empathetic because they'll recognize right away that this is something important to you. because you're using that technique. And I thought that was pretty important learning too.
Well, I promise that next time I will try it and see how that goes. I did have an experience today that I am still processing as the day's going, and my frustration from this morning till now has died down, and I've come to realize that that person doesn't know what it means to be Latina in Cazenovia and English as a second language. And so,
I think I grew up in a white community in the Bronx. Actually, it was Italian and Irish. Went to a Catholic school with nuns, and that's all it was Italian and Irish. When I went to high school in Long Island, that was the first time I'd ever seen African Americans. Really, that was it. So I grew up and now I live in Cazenovia, where there's very few Latinx. I'm not sure I'm saying that word right, and I apologize. I know what it means, but I'm not sure I'm saying it right. But
no, you're right.
And African American, they're not here, and I am sad about that. I love Cazenovia. I love everything about it. The people, well, I love it, nearly everything about it, but it's not diverse. It just isn't. And I can't imagine being the only one in the room who is, whether it's Black or whatever. I had lots of experiences as a woman in business, being the only woman in the room. So that does give me some amount of empathy with people in that kind of situation. And but I don't think until I went to college and met people who were different races, different religions, from different countries, different gender identity, whatever, sexual orientation, that I began prejudice is about it. I admit that I grew up in a New York City cop household, multi-generation. Much as I appreciate law enforcement when we need them, I also know that they can do bad stuff. I saw it. So I had lots of prejudice going into college. It was really an eye-opening experience to meet other people and understand that, they had the same worries I did and a lot more hurtful situations than I had to deal with.
It's interesting how you say you come from a law enforcement family and background, because I would have never guessed based on our conversation. Usually,
my father wouldn't have guessed it either.
Usually what I'm challenged with, it's usually a sort of hostile environment that I've experienced. Of course, I know not every cop has been like that. I've had wonderful relationships with campus community and university police officers. But when it comes to political dialogue, it's been very, just let me watch what I say before I say it. And I felt like for tonight, it was very genuine, very just honest. So I appreciate that.
Well, in 2016, I won't go into the long story about it, but my father had met Hillary Clinton a number of years ago. And I had the great thrill of having dinner with Bill and Hillary Clinton 10 years ago. But anyway, he had met her. And there's some funny stories connected with it that I won't bother you with. But so when she was running for president, we tried to convince him. He has 5 daughters, and we tried to convince him to vote for Hillary, and he would not do it. Absolutely would not do it, because she's Democrat. She was a woman, and we tried to point out all the things about Trump, that why we didn't want him to vote for Trump. Eventually, what he did, and at that time he was in an independent living facility in Geneva, New York. What he did and convinced, I think, 12 other residents of his community, they voted for him for president. So he wouldn't vote for Hillary, but at least he didn't vote for Trump. he voted for John Collins, and he got other people to do it too. That's as close as I came to voter fraud, because he gave me the ballot to mail. I was this close to changing it.
Well, I'm glad you were able to have that discussion of voting and giving perspective of Hillary, given that, like you said, he has 5 female daughters. And so
Well,
one would think
when he was having his picture taken with her, this was 10 years before she ran for president. He had said he wouldn't have anything to. She was visiting the Hobart William Smith campus when she was a New York State senator, and he said he wouldn't have anything to do with her. But we maneuvered to get them together, and as they were taking a picture, I yelled out to her, "He's a Republican," and she leaned over and whispered in his ear, "So is my father."
Oh. Well, thank you so much. I know we've talked about the questions we had in mind. Is there anything else you'd like our viewers to know, or a topic you'd like to talk about tonight?
One thing I would like to emphasize is anybody can make a difference on something they're passionate about. And I had mentioned this to you, that I'd just tell a brief story about a young lady I know that graduated from my alma mater, Hobart William Smith, a few years ago, that as an undergrad, so she was 20 years old, as an undergrad, again, long story that I won't get into, that she got very interested in a school in Africa that had high needs. And she I don't know if you can see this, it's a bead, it's a glass bead. She worked with some people in a glass factory in Africa to make these beads on necklaces and bracelets, etc., to raise money for what the school said they needed the most, which was a fence around the school to stop things from being stolen. So it was something she was passionate about. She was an undergraduate. She made a difference in that school. And out of that, it has morphed into, it's still with the same name. It's called One Bead. It is now based in Boston. It has, you can look up onebead.org and read all about what she's doing. It's an organization that goes into the inner city schools in Boston, and some not inner city schools that they charge them for to have money to be able to do the things they're trying to do. But they take groups of young people. They want them younger than high school, because their feeling is by the time they get into high school, they've learned too many, not necessarily the good things that they should be learning. So they want to get them when they're young, enthusiastic. And she puts them into groups and teaches them about leadership, about advocating, about working together, all the kinds of skills that you need to succeed in the world. And the way they do it is around a project. She says to them, we're going, as a group, you're going to have to decide on a project that you want to do. And I'm going to give, each of you have to come up with an idea about what you want to do and pitch it to the rest of the people in your group. So they have to learn how to advocate, how to do a presentation, how to have a PowerPoint or signs or whatever to advocate for what they want the group to do. Then the group selects what they want to do, and they're given $1,000 to do it. And as a group, they then do things like there was one group that decided there was too much plastic water bottles being used, and they raised money they used the money to get reusable cups, and then also educated everybody in their school about the importance of doing something like that. So she was one person that started doing this, and she's now affected hundreds of kids, hundreds of them. So if there's something that you feel passionate about, don't feel like you can't do something about it, because you can. You may not completely succeed, but you will make a difference.
Well, thank you so much on that, because I think our students need to know that in a time that we're going through, especially a recession, that you can make a difference, whether it's political, going into campaigns, learning about the voting process, advocating for your social and human rights, or also going into the passion you have, whether it's nonprofits or within Cazenovia College. I know there's a lot of artists, there's a lot of creative minds, and putting maybe that creative mind into something that brings joy to others or brings either school supplies or education, it's important. So thank you so much for that. Remind us that, if we're passionate about something, let's just do it and see how far we get, because we will impact at least one person going and moving forward. So thank you so much, Maureen. It has been a pleasure to get to know you, get to know Cazenovia Call to Action and all the great things that y'all are doing. I will definitely connect with you to hopefully have more newsletters from Cazenovia Call to Action. I would love to know what y'all are doing and how I can help. And thank you again for talking to our students, our faculty, our residents at Cazenovia. And just a reminder to our viewers, you don't have to agree with us or our guests, but I appreciate that you were able to listen to us. Our dialogue help us potentially educate us as well as educate you in that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And that is our program for tonight. Thank you, Maureen. Bye. Have a good day.